The film opens with a prison transport convoy on its way to the courthouse, where a team leader named Hella suddenly orders the vehicles to pull over after noticing that one of the prisoners, a very young man, is suffering from a severe panic attack. Wanting to calm him down before they arrive, Hella reassures the terrified prisoner that everything is going to be fine, although nobody really knows what kind of crime this young man committed in the first place. But the moment they finally arrive at the courthouse, it becomes clear that this case has attracted massive public attention because crowds of protesters are already waiting outside the building. As Helle escorts the young prisoner inside, the situation instantly turns into chaos when an unknown sniper suddenly shoots the prisoner in the head, killing him on the spot before anyone has the chance to react. After that shocking opening, the story shifts toward another prisoner named Zaid, a man who spends most of his time in prison quietly playing chess while staying out of trouble. One day, Zaid notices a younger inmate being harassed by several prisoners, so he casually steps in and saves the kid by inviting him to sit down and play chess instead. Interestingly, none of the other prisoners dare to challenge Zaid or interfere with what he is doing, which immediately shows that he commands a great deal of respect inside the prison walls. Not long afterward, the film gives us a glimpse into Zaid's prison cell, where a photograph hanging on the wall strongly suggests that he has a son waiting for him outside. A few moments later, a prison guard informs Zaid that his father has arrived for a visitation, causing him to head toward the meeting room without suspecting anything unusual. However, when Zaid arrives, he quickly realizes that the visitor is not his father at all, but Hella, who clearly came there with a very specific purpose in mind. During their conversation, Hella asks Zaid whether he knows a dangerous gang leader named Mutter, a criminal figure who has recently resurfaced and started recruiting large numbers of young men into his organization. Hella then reveals the real reason she came to see him, which is to convince Zaid to infiltrate Mutter's gang and eventually eliminate him from the inside. In exchange for completing the mission, Hella promises that Zaid will be released from prison and have his name completely cleared. But despite the tempting offer, Zaid immediately refuses because he knows better than anyone how dangerous it is to become involved with gangsters again, especially after hearing that Hella recently failed to protect another prisoner under her supervision. From Zaid's perspective, if she could not even keep that prisoner alive, then there is no reason for him to believe that she can protect his family while he is undercover inside Mutter's organization. Of course, the film also explains why Hella is so desperate to recruit someone like Zaid in the first place. Because before ending up in prison, he was not only a highly respected specialist doctor, but also a former gangster and a famous martial arts athlete known throughout the city. In the previous film, Zaid was forced to slaughter an entire group of gangsters after his younger brother was murdered, which is exactly why Hell believes he is the perfect man for this mission. Unlike ordinary prisoners, Zaid is someone who already understands both the criminal underworld and the violence required to survive inside it. And now Zaid is being pulled back into that world once again. This is Darkland, The Return. Later that night, Zaid is suddenly awakened by a prison guard and transferred into a special cell block occupied entirely by gang members. And without needing any explanation at all, he immediately realizes that this is obviously part of Hella's plan to pressure him into cooperating with her mission. By the following morning, Zaid quickly notices that this block operates very differently from the rest of the prison, because inmates here are allowed to freely visit one another's cells, meaning it is only a matter of time before someone comes looking for him. Later that afternoon, Zaid heads toward the prison payphone to call his ex-wife and ask for permission to speak with his son Noah, especially since it just so happens to be the boy's birthday that day. Unfortunately, even after waiting until the very last second before the call is disconnected, Noah still refuses to speak to his father, leaving Zaid completely devastated as he slowly walks back toward his cell. During that moment, he begins seriously thinking about what will happen to his family if he spends too many more years locked inside prison walls. And for the first time, Hella's dangerous offer starts sounding like the only chance he has left. To Zaid, Noah means absolutely everything, which is why he finally decides to accept Hella's proposal, although he makes it very clear that once the mission is over, she is never allowed to involve him in another operation again. In order to infiltrate Mutter's organization, Hella explains that Zaid first needs to attract the attention of a prisoner named Adil, a trusted associate of Mutter, whose job inside the prison is to recruit former inmates into the gang after they are released. Without wasting any time, Zaid immediately puts Hella's strategy into motion, and later that same day he notices 3 gangsters who had previously visited his cell wandering nearby. Calmly approaching them without hesitation, Zaid brutally kills all 3 men while fully aware that Adil is secretly watching everything unfold from a distance. which is exactly what Zaid wanted from the very beginning, because he knows this kind of violence is the fastest way to earn recognition inside the criminal world. Not long afterward, Adil finally approaches Zaid and offers him the chance to join Mutter's organization, although there is still one final task he must complete before gaining their full trust. Adil orders Zaid to severely injure another prisoner being held in cell 157, forcing him into a situation that deeply troubles him once he returns to his own cell. Despite his violent reputation and criminal past, Zaid is not naturally a cruel man, and the idea of hurting an innocent prisoner weighs heavily on his conscience. Still, he also understands that this is now the price of continuing the undercover mission, so in the end, he forces himself to carry out the job exactly as instructed. After finally earning Adil's trust, Zaid is eventually released from prison and officially welcomed into Mutter's network. Rather than returning directly to his old home, he chooses to stay in a new apartment instead. Although before settling in, he first visits the house of his ex-wife Stein. By this point, Stein has already remarried and is heavily pregnant with another man's child, making the situation even more emotionally complicated for Zaid. Even so, he does not come there hoping to rebuild their relationship, because the only thing he truly wants is the chance to spend at least a little time with his son again. Later that same night, Zaid is picked up by one of Adil's associates named Jimmy, who orders him into a car and tells him that he is finally going to meet Mutter in person. However, before they even reach their destination, the atmosphere inside the vehicle suddenly turns hostile when Zaid is violently grabbed from behind and interrogated by Jimmy, who clearly does not trust him at all. Jimmy finds it suspicious that a highly educated specialist doctor would willingly involve himself with gangsters, although because Mutter has already accepted Zaid into the organization, the only thing Jimmy can do for now is warn him that if he ever turns out to be an informant, he will personally make sure Zaid never leaves alive. The following morning, Zaid secretly meets Hele inside a museum, where he informs her about everything that happened the previous night, including Jimmy's growing suspicion toward him. Even so, Hele tells Zaid to stay calm and continue the operation exactly as planned, while also assuring him that nobody within the intelligence division or the police force knows anything about this mission besides herself. In other words, if the operation fails, Zaid will essentially be on his own. That night, Jimmy arrives once again to pick Zaid up and take him somewhere unknown. But this time, the secrecy becomes even more intense, because Zaid's eyes are covered during the entire trip to prevent him from discovering the exact location of the gang's hideout. Once they finally arrive, Zaid is immediately searched before being allowed inside the building, placing him in an extremely dangerous situation because he secretly brought a recording device with him. One small mistake could easily expose his entire identity and get him killed on the spot. Fortunately for him, the hidden wire accidentally becomes tangled inside his clothing during the inspection, allowing it to go unnoticed. After the search is finished, Zaid finally discovers why he was brought there in the first place, because one of Mutter's men has just been shot and urgently needs medical treatment. Mutter himself is also present during the operation, closely observing everything Zaid does. The problem is that Zaid has not performed surgery in a very long time, meaning he needs complete concentration in order to save the wounded man successfully. At first, Jimmy strongly objects when Zaid demands that everyone leave the room so he can focus properly, but surprisingly, Mutter immediately agrees because he understands exactly why a surgeon would need silence and calm during a life-or-death operation. Eventually, the procedure is completed successfully, and the fact that Zaid manages to save the injured gangster instantly earns Mutter's respect. In fact, Mutter personally drives Zaid home afterward, sincerely thanking him for saving his younger brother's life. During the ride back, Zaid also learns an important lesson about just how risky this undercover mission truly is, especially when it comes to handling surveillance equipment. Realizing that simply throwing away the microphone after each mission could easily expose him, Zaid comes up with a safer solution by hiding the recording device inside his jacket and sewing it into the fabric from the outside. Several days later, Zaid is invited to gather with the rest of Mutter's organization at a restaurant, where the gang is holding a tense meeting with another criminal group led by a man named Boba. Apparently, Boba recently shot Mutter's younger brother in the leg after catching him selling narcotics inside territory that did not belong to them. It is during this meeting that the film really shows why Mutter is feared by everyone around him, because despite his calm appearance and polite demeanor, he is actually an extremely calculating and strategic leader who knows exactly how to manipulate every situation to his advantage. Later that night, Jimmy assigns Zaid to participate in another operation involving narcotics smuggled through the harbor, and for this mission, he is partnered with another gang member named Rashid. At first, everything goes smoothly, with Rashid successfully collecting the packages and leaving the area without any trouble. But when it becomes Zaid's turn, several unknown men suddenly attack him out of nowhere. Instead of fighting back immediately, Zaid intentionally allows himself to be beaten because his real objective is secretly attaching a tracking device underneath the attacker's vehicle. Then, after the mysterious group finally leaves the harbor, Zaid quietly follows them from a distance. Not long afterwards, Zaid discovers that the men who attacked him are actually members of Boba's gang. And without showing even the slightest fear, he boldly walks straight into their hideout to demand that the stolen narcotics be returned. Unfortunately for Boba, he has no idea who Zaid really is, so instead of treating him seriously, he simply laughs at him and assumes that Zaid is nothing more than one of Mutter's insignificant errand boys. Rather than reacting immediately, Zaid calmly allows Boba and his men to mock him for as long as they want, but the moment they let their guard down, he suddenly launches a brutal attack and starts taking them down one by one. The violent outburst completely catches Boba off guard because nobody expected a single man to charge directly into enemy territory and fight an entire gang alone. As chaos erupts inside the building, Boba's men quickly realize they cannot allow Zaid to escape alive, so they immediately surround him and try to cut off every possible exit. But Zaid has never been the type of person to surrender easily, and with reckless determination, he begins using parkour techniques to move through the structure while desperately searching for a way out. Eventually, he manages to reach the lower level and escape by stealing a motorcycle before speeding away from the scene. Of course, Boba's gang refuses to let him go that easily, so they aggressively chase after him while firing nonstop gunshots in the middle of the pursuit. Even though Zaid pushes the motorcycle to its limit in an attempt to escape, the vehicle eventually explodes after being hit repeatedly by bullets, throwing him violently onto the road. Just as Boba's men prepare to finish him off, the sound of approaching police sirens suddenly forces them to retreat before law enforcement arrives at the scene. Meanwhile, Zaid quickly takes advantage of the situation by jumping into a car driven by a mysterious woman before finally making his way back to Mutter's headquarters. Once he arrives, he immediately explains everything that happened, including how he infiltrated Boba's hideout solely to recover the stolen packages. At first, nobody believes his story because it sounds far too reckless to be true. But the moment Zaid pulls out Boba's handgun as proof, the entire room suddenly changes its attitude and starts praising him for his bravery. As Zaid prepares to leave, he is approached by a young gang member named Didi, whose job within Mutter's organization is distributing narcotics throughout the area. Didi asks Zaid for help collecting money from someone who previously bought drugs, but failed to pay the debt afterward. Interestingly, Didi also happens to be Zaid's neighbor in the same apartment building, which makes the situation feel even more personal for him. Deep down, Zaid genuinely feels disappointed seeing someone as young as Didi getting involved in the criminal world just to support his family, because despite everything he has done in life, Zaid still understands how destructive this path can become. That is exactly why, before agreeing to help him, Zaid decides to teach the young man a harsh lesson by giving him advice while also roughing him up at the same time. The following day, Zaid tries once again to reconnect with Noah, hoping to slowly repair the damaged relationship between them. He attempts to explain that just because he went to prison does not automatically make him an evil person, but unfortunately, Noah immediately rejects that idea after repeating things he clearly heard from his mother. Even though the conversation hurts him deeply, Zaid continues trying to stay patient because rebuilding trust with his son means more to him than anything else in his life. After meeting Noah, Zaid later reunites with Hela inside a library, where he hands over all the secret recordings he has managed to collect so far during the operation. Before they part ways, Hela warns him to remain extremely careful moving forward because according to intelligence reports, Boba's organization is now actively searching for him and planning to take revenge for what happened at the hideout. The following day, Zaid is summoned once again by Mutter and assigned to work alongside Mutter's younger brother Nassar, as well as Didi. Their task seems simple enough at first because they are only supposed to collect protection money from local shop owners operating within Mutter's territory. In the beginning, everything goes smoothly as the group moves from one location to another without any serious problems. But just as they return to their vehicle, the entire situation suddenly explodes into chaos when an unknown gunman opens fire on them without warning. The brutal ambush kills Nassar almost instantly, leaving Zaid and Didi desperately trying to survive as bullets continue flying around them. At the same time, Hela, who happens to be nearby during the attack, immediately contacts the nearest police patrol units and orders them to move toward the location as quickly as possible. Before long, the sound of approaching sirens begins echoing through the streets, causing the attackers to panic and retreat long enough for Zaid and Didi to escape from the scene. The two men rush into a nearby store hoping to hide, but the attackers refuse to give up and continue hunting them down inside the building. Realizing that Didi could easily die if he stays there any longer, Zaid tells the young man to escape through the back door while he stays behind to hold off the gunmen alone. As Zaid struggles to defend himself against the attackers, another figure suddenly arrives to assist him, and to his surprise, that person turns out to be Hella herself. Unfortunately, the situation becomes even more dangerous because Didi never actually left the building and secretly witnesses the entire encounter between Zaid and Hella with his own eyes. Even though nothing is said directly, this moment alone becomes enough to place Zaid's entire undercover identity at risk. By the next day, Jimmy reports to Mudir that the men responsible for Nassar's death have supposedly been dealt with. But despite that update, the events of the previous attack leave everyone inside the organization deeply suspicious. The gangsters begin noticing several strange details surrounding the incident, especially after discovering numerous tracking devices hidden inside vehicles, frequently used by Mudir. Of course, those devices were secretly planted by Zaid throughout the operation, although nobody knows that yet. On top of that, the police response during the ambush happened far too quickly, causing several members of the organization to suspect that the entire attack may have been orchestrated from the very beginning. The pressure slowly starts becoming unbearable for Zaid, whose body begins trembling from stress and fear as he realizes his cover could collapse at any moment. Hoping to avoid drawing more attention to himself, he decides to leave and head home. But before he can even make it downstairs, Mutter suddenly asks him to come along to another location. A short time later, they arrive at an abandoned warehouse where Jimmy, Rashid, and several other gang members are already waiting for them. The atmosphere immediately feels tense and unsettling, especially when Mutter starts asking Zaid a series of sharp and suspicious questions about the previous day's events. It quickly becomes obvious that this warehouse is not just an ordinary meeting place, but an interrogation site. And during those moments, Zaid genuinely believes his identity has finally been exposed. However, just when he prepares himself for the worst possible outcome, the person accused of betrayal unexpectedly turns out to be Rashid instead. To make matters even worse, Mudir orders Zaid to participate in the interrogation personally, forcing him into an emotionally devastating situation. Throughout the entire ordeal, Zaid feels overwhelming guilt as Rashid is brutally tortured until he finally confesses to leaking information to Boba's gang. Even then, Rashid explains that he only betrayed them because Boba's people had kidnapped his mother and forced him to cooperate. After being beaten nearly to death, Rashid is eventually taken away to be executed, leaving Zaid completely shaken by everything he has witnessed. Feeling responsible for what happened, he later meets with Heli and tells her that he wants to quit the operation altogether because he cannot continue watching young men get destroyed and killed as collateral damage for the mission. But instead of accepting his resignation, Heli coldly reminds Zaid that abandoning the operation midway will only send him straight back to prison with an even longer sentence waiting for him. Whether he likes it or not, the mission has already gone too far to stop now. Meanwhile, Mutter secretly begins interrogating Didi behind closed doors because the young man has become suspicious after disappearing immediately following the previous day's attack. Knowing that something is clearly wrong, Mutter pressures Didi to reveal everything he knows, while also threatening to kill his mother if he refuses to cooperate. Faced with an impossible situation and having no other choice left, Didi finally breaks under the pressure and exposes Zaid's connection with a police officer, effectively destroying the undercover operation from the inside. The following day, Zaid spends some peaceful time together with Noah, and little by little, the relationship between father and son finally starts improving thanks to Zaid's patient and sincere efforts to reconnect with him. Unfortunately, their moment of happiness does not last very long because while they are on their way home, unknown attackers suddenly ambush them with a barrage of gunfire. Miraculously, neither Zaid nor Noah is injured during the attack, but the incident alone is enough for Zaid to realize that his cover has officially been blown and that anyone close to him is now in terrible danger. Understanding that staying near Noah will only put the boy's life at greater risk, Zaid reluctantly says goodbye and asks his son not to forget him as a father, even though deep down he knows there is a very real possibility they may never see each other again after this moment. The emotional weight of the farewell hits even harder because Zaid has spent the entire film trying to rebuild the bond he lost with his son, only to be forced to walk away from him once more. When Zaid finally returns to his apartment, he immediately notices that gang members have already searched the entire place. Every hidden recording device has disappeared, And even worse, the photograph of Noah is now missing as well. Terrified that Mutter's organization may already be targeting his son, Zaid desperately tries calling Hell for help. But before she can even answer the phone, he is suddenly ambushed, restrained, and thrown into a vehicle by Mutter's men. A short time later, Zaid is brought back to the same warehouse interrogation site from before, where Jimmy forces him to face Mutter directly and explain himself. To make matters even worse, Mutter also reveals that once Zaid is dead, his ex-wife and Noah will be hunted down afterward. The moment Zaid hears that his family is about to become targets, panic and rage completely consume him. Even while tied up, he desperately struggles to free himself, tearing apart his own wrists in the process, because at that point, escaping becomes the only thing that matters anymore. Once he finally manages to break free, Zaid immediately attacks Mutter's men with overwhelming brutality, killing anyone standing between him and the exit. After escaping the warehouse, Zaid heads straight toward Mutter's headquarters with only one objective left in his mind, which is to kill the gang leader before his family's harmed. Along the way, every gang member who tries to stop him is violently taken down, and the sheer savagery of Zaid's rampage terrifies many of the younger members so badly that they simply abandon the building and run away rather than face him. Eventually, Zaid reaches Mutter's personal room, but instead of finding the gang leader waiting there, he only discovers a photograph of Noah sitting in plain sight. As Zaid stares at the picture, his attention briefly slips away from his surroundings, and that single moment of distraction becomes enough for Mutter to suddenly appear behind him and open fire. Several bullets strike Zaid in the leg and lower body, leaving him badly wounded and unable to properly fight back. Seeing Zaid weakened on the ground, Mutter prepares to execute him once and for all, but before he can pull the trigger, Didi unexpectedly arrives and points a gun directly at Mutter. Even though Didi was the one who exposed Zaid's secret in the first place, the young man still cannot forget the kindness and guidance Zaid showed him throughout their time together. But before the standoff can continue any further, Zaid suddenly fires his weapon and kills Mutter himself, finally bringing the violent gang leader's reign to an end. Afterward, Zaid immediately tells Didi to leave and warns him never to involve himself in the criminal world again if he truly wants a better future. Not long later, the sound of approaching police sirens begins filling the area, and with the authorities closing in, Zaid quietly decides to disappear from the scene as well. So the moral of the story is never trust a guy who can do surgery, parkour, martial arts, undercover missions, and parenting better than your entire government.